Well, here we are. We're still in Luke chapter 6. We're still in Jesus' sermon. In Luke, it was on a plain. It wasn't on a mountain. So we think it was probably a different sermon, but on the same topic, the same thoughts. And I must admit, when you're preaching through this sermon from Jesus, it's hard, isn't it? Like, he doesn't hold back. And in a sense, as a pastor, I want to just bring you lots of happy thoughts and tell you how great you are and all those sorts of things so that you'll love me more. But Jesus has got a message for us, and if he's preached it, we have to preach it. It's for a reason, and it's for our good. It's for us. It really is. And so when we look at these words, they bring a lot of conviction to me. And I reckon they probably bring a lot of conviction to many of you too. Don't ignore that. Don't ignore that. It's for us. It's for our good. Just a couple of quick announcements. Wednesday prayer this week, I said, if you were here on Wednesday, I said we'd be praying for the high school camp leaders and students. That's actually the following Wednesday. I'm sorry I got that one wrong. This Wednesday, we're praying for marriages in the church. And if you want us to pray for your marriage, you can write it on your connections card, or better still, come along and we will pray for you here. So that's this Wednesday at 6:30. Next Sunday, Pastor Adam is going to be preaching. Who's excited about that? They're excited. That's a good sign, Pastor Adam. And then the following Sunday, there's a special guest. His name is Michael Oon. And he is the Australian director of a group called the Fourth Musketeer. It's a group that is basically focused on men's ministry in Australia, and I guarantee you'll want to be for that. Ladies, this is not just for the men, this is for all of us. So I encourage you to come along and hear what he is all about, and I know that you'll appreciate that. All right, Luke 6. 2 weeks ago, there was that message about loving your enemies, about loving those who are hard to love, maybe people who have said things to you or persecuted you in some way. And I did say that this was some of the hardest teaching in the Bible. And I said, if you've got an example of how you were able to love someone who was hard to love this week, write it on your card. And some of you did that. And I just want to say, good on you. Thank you firstly for sharing it, but most importantly, thank you for bringing light into the dark. Thank you for doing that, for listening to the words of Jesus and doing what was hard to do and bringing love to someone who wasn't sending it to you. Well, this sermon continues in that same theme. I guess we're looking about the essence of Christian character, you could say. We're talking about the state of our heart, a follower of Jesus, what that should look like. If you're a follower of Jesus, your heart or your character, it's different. You change as you're transformed, as you're sanctified more and more, especially if you live and walk closely with Jesus. And the fruit of our lives, the things we do and say and our actions, people can see it. They see it in the fruit. A Christian stands out. Remember we said that loving someone who is hard to love, or even someone who has hurt you or persecuted you, it's how we bring that light into a dark world. It's how we be part of God's plan for restoring the world. We are part of it. We're part of his plan to restore the world. I assure you, I'm not talking about some mushy, mamby-pamby religion or way of life. On the contrary, I'm talking about being men and women of God who stand up against hatred and show restraint and actually return the hate that we sometimes receive with love. I'll tell you what, that takes guts. This is not some soft religion. This is hard to do. It takes a man and a woman of God to do this kind of stuff. We love. We have strong character that comes through Christ, who put his life on the line for the salvation of the world, and that's what we do too. Anyone can seek revenge. Anyone can hate those who hate us first. It's the person who digs deep and works through their hurt and emotions and the offense they may be feeling and seeks to bring peace That's the person that displays emotional maturity. It just turned off. Please, God, let it turn back on. Oh, God is telling me to do this off the cuff. All right. I love technology. It says it's using a slower engine. I don't even know what that means. All right. I think we're back on track. All right, well, let's just go straight to the scripture. Luke 6:37. Words of Jesus, remember? It's on the screen behind me. All right, listen to these words, church. Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Anyone feeling conviction yet? Do not condemn others, or it will all come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven. Just let those words sink in for a moment, because sometimes I don't really need to preach much more than what Jesus says himself. You could almost just sit down and say, just dwell on that for 20 minutes. Sermon done. Don't think of someone else. I know we always say that. Rachel said that one to me last night. Preachers always say, don't think of someone else, think of yourself. I know. We say it for a reason. Because immediately we think, yeah, I'm hoping someone's hearing these words today. Nope. It's for me. It's for you. Here's the first point. The standard you judge others by is the standard you will be judged by. The implication of those words from Jesus should get your attention. The standard by which I judge others is the standard by which I will be judged. And the problem is that we tend to put a higher standard on others than we do on ourselves. These words, judge and condemn, they're actually really closely related. There's a reason why Jesus uses both words, one after the other. That's because they are linked. Here's what I think Jesus is saying. When you judge someone, you're putting them on trial in your head, in your mind, and deciding about them that they are someone they shouldn't be or have done something they shouldn't have done according to your standards, which leads us to condemn them. And condemning is almost always an outward action, usually with words pronouncing guilt of that thing that we've just judged them on. And the problem, of course, is that all too often we don't live up to that same standard that we hold other people to. We might think we do, but I promise you, we're more forgiving of ourselves than we are of others. Jesus wants you to be just as forgiving and gracious of others as you are of yourself. In fact, it's way deeper than that. Jesus wants you to be as forgiving and as gracious to others as he was to you. That's the standard. The forgiveness and grace that God gave to you is what we need to give out to others. Are we willing to do that? When someone says something you don't like or does something you disagree with or lets you down or offends you, are we willing to judge like Jesus would ask us to? Now, the question is, in this verse, is Jesus saying he will judge you and forgive you according to your actions towards others, or is he talking about the world judging and forgiving you according to your actions? I think it's a good question. That's the question I had when I read it. What's Jesus saying? Is he saying he's going to do that, or is what the world's going to do to me? You know what, church? I think it's both. I actually think it's both things. If that surprises you, stay with me. The command from Jesus is don't you dare judge someone because he knows that you can't live up to the standard we place on others. In other words, the only one whose standard was perfect was Jesus. He was the only one who had the perfect standard. He's the only one that will never be a hypocrite in any way. And anyway, he's the only one with the authority to judge. We don't have that. Judging someone is not our job. Our job is to love people. So go ahead and judge and condemn others if you want, but that's the standard that Jesus says he's going to judge you by, which is why I'm so grateful and thankful for God's grace. Because if it wasn't for that, then I do stand condemned. Instead of being judged guilty like I deserved, I've been forgiven because of the cross. But here's the thing. We never do something disobediently, simply expecting God's forgiveness. Because we not only cheapen his grace and the immense cost to Jesus for that grace, I think sometimes there's going to be a big question mark about the repentance that we had. So when Jesus says you'll be judged by how you judge others, it's a serious thing because it actually happens. It's just that he receives our guilt for it. He takes our punishment for when we do that. So that's how serious it is. That pardon we received cost him so much. It cost him so much that surely the idea of judging others should start to become distasteful to us. Point 2. Failure to love and to be generous to others robs us of receiving generosity and grace in return. Verse 38. Give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more. In fact, running over and poured out into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount that you get back. If you've ever wondered in your life where the love is, it might be time to look at what you give out first. Now, I don't for a second think that the application is that you give just to get, okay? I think that some people misinterpret that. That's the opposite of what Jesus did. But the truth here about life is that there is often a return for what we give out, both good and bad. People will be more inclined to love on you if you love on them first. But if what you give out is harsh judgment, then what do you think we get back? Because the amount you give will determine the amount you get back. This truth applies in so many ways in our life. You can put it into your marriage, into any relationship you have with your work colleagues. What you give is what you get back. It will determine what you get back. If you're passive-aggressive, your return might be on those same lines. If you're not generous, don't be surprised when the world fails to be generous to you. What you give out will determine what you receive in return. This verse is not just talking about being generous with your financial wealth. I believe wholeheartedly that it's referring to being generous with our emotional and spiritual health as well. In other words, give out grace generously. Give out love generously. Give forgiveness, give kindness, give peace, give joy, give encouragement. And yes, give your money as generously as you can. And then what you give and the amount you give will determine what you receive in return. The illustration that Jesus gives is that of a container being filled, probably with wheat, let's say, or a grain of some sort. Maybe if you can imagine rice. And you know what it's like when you fill up a container with rice. If you push it down a bit or give it a shake, there's room for more. And if you keep pouring, it fills out over the top. And that's what Jesus says here. He says, this is the generosity of what comes back to you in return. It may not be in this lifetime, but there's a promise of a very generous return when you give generously. The amount of good you give will determine what you receive in return. The amount of bad you give, I don't have to answer. In fact, I've got a great illustration for you. Kate, come on up and share.
Good morning, everybody. Nathan has asked me to share this morning something of the journey I've been on in the last week or so, over the last 10 days. Please excuse me because I want to follow notes because I want to do justice to this. Many of you know that 10 days ago I was attacked by a dog as I was walking my dog. It was terrifying. I'm not going to pull any punches with that. It was quite horrible. And as a result, I ended up in hospital. But I'm well on the way to recovery, and more importantly, Bella is doing really well. So that's not what I'm here to talk about, but it kind of sets the scene for what I want to talk about today. Over the last 10 days, I have experienced love in action through this church family. Firstly, on Thursday evening and on Friday, as I was in hospital and I was waiting to find out exactly what needed to be done to repair the damage to my hands, I had an overwhelming peace and knowledge that God was with me. His presence was tangible. And I know that's because many of you were praying. A call went out to our prayer team almost immediately. And I know that people were praying for me and I felt it. So I want to say thank you for a start. You were upholding me. Your prayers were answered. And even moving forward from that, a series of circumstances happened on the Friday whereby I was able to get treatment a lot faster than it might have been able. And in the Alpha series, I'm not sure if it's Rick Warren or somebody else says that when we pray, coincidences happen. When we don't pray, they don't happen so much. I know people were praying on that day that I would get treatment swiftly. And a very strange series of circumstances happened such that that happened. So again, thank you for praying. Your prayers were answered. People, prayer works. Secondly, we have been overwhelmed by the assistance that we've been given and offered over the last week by many of you. Not just physical assistance with meals and things like that, but phone calls and care and everything else. And, this is love in action. This is the church. And I'm so proud and grateful that I can call you my church family. So, again, another really big shout out. Anyway, for those who don't know me, I'm a physiotherapist. So you can imagine this isn't exactly a good look for somebody who works with their hands. This has presented us with something of a dilemma this week. I'm self-employed, and so not being able to work for some time is less than ideal. And combine that with our out-of-pocket medical expenses over this whole little adventure is turning out to be fairly costly for us. I have had many people over the last 10 days ask me what compensation we intend to pursue. And giving us advice as to what law firm to use to pursue the dog owners legally, and almost with the expectation that that's the only course of action that we can take. Now, I'm going to be honest, Nathan's been challenging us to be real, and I've got to say that by Monday, Tuesday, I was starting to feel a little bit, hey, I'm kind of the innocent victim in this, and I was in a fair bit of pain. And so I was starting to think, well, is this something that we should be doing? So David and I had a few discussions about what we should do. Were there legal avenues we could pursue? And if so, how would we approach it? But most importantly, we really just wanted to have a peace about what was the right thing to do in this situation. Foremost in our minds was to not cause hardship or distress to the other people involved. And when I say that we wrestled with conflicting feelings and thoughts, I can tell you for me that's a reality. I really wrestled with a lot of conflicting feelings and thoughts on it. On Tuesday night, after a fairly lengthy discussion, we came to the conclusion that we weren't going to come to a conclusion. And our plan at that time was the next day to put a shout out to one of the board members of this church who we have a lot of trust in and who we believe would be able to help us to get some insight into that. Anyway, God knew what was going on. I woke up in the very early hours on Wednesday morning. Early hours read 1:30ish. And I started seeking God, praying and asking wisdom in all of this. He answered that prayer, and by the time we got up in the morning, I really felt I had God's answer. I shared it with David, and we both agreed that we had peace about the direction we should go. So that phone call was never made, because I think God answered what we couldn't answer ourselves. In those early hours, God reminded me of the vastness of his love and his grace. He challenged me by asking just what price I would put on having the opportunity to show that love and grace to somebody else. He also reminded me of how much his forgiveness for me cost him, and that I had the chance to pay that forward. The monetary cost for this is nothing compared to the blessings that would flow from pursuing his way instead of the world's way. So on Thursday afternoon, I walked up the road in the hope of being able to meet with the owners of the dog who had attacked me, to let them know that we were okay, to thank them for their help during the attack, and to assure them that we were not angry and we weren't planning to pursue them. Through a chain of circumstances, which again I believe only God could have put in place, I was not only able to do that, but also meet with and thank several other people who came to my assistance on the day. Several of them I didn't even know were there at the time. And that included, there was one person I thought I was never going to get to thank, and that was a guy who stopped his car and got the dog off me. And I had no idea who he was. Well, he lived just up the road and somebody knew who it was, and I had the opportunity to thank him. What a blessing. Really, what a blessing. I don't think that I can do justice in explaining the healing that took place over that hour. Each meeting was emotional, and there were quite a lot of hugs and tears, but the overwhelming feeling afterwards was joy and of being so blessed. Following God's plan, and this has brought us joy, healing and peace. And I'm now praying that it will also bring us the opportunity to further some of those relationships. We were just singing before a song that said, "You will never let me down." During the Alpha course a few weeks ago, a young man looked me in the eye and he said, "Has God ever let you down?" And a brief summary of my answer to that, I think, went along the lines of, no. People have let me down. I have let God down, but God has never let me down. And I really think this is an example of that, where God has come through, he's answered our cry and saying, we don't know what to do. And he said, love, show justice, show mercy, be kind. And out of that has flowed a great blessing. On Thursday, before I went for this walk to meet people, I was reading Romans 12, which gave me even more confidence that I was doing what I was going with God's blessing. I've kind of paraphrased it, so for those of you who are, a little bit funny, don't take this the wrong way, but this is the way God spoke to me through that scripture. Verses 14 to 19 in the Kate paraphrase says, "Bless those who cause you harm, whether intentionally or not. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you always have all the facts about the situation. Never repay harm with more harm. Do things in such a way that show that you yourself have experienced grace and that you honour this great gift that God has given you. Do all that you can to live at peace with everyone. Dear friends, never seek to justify yourselves or claim your supposed rights. Leave that to God." So I don't know the end of the story yet. No, following this path means that, we're going to be somewhat out of pocket, but that's okay because we believe that we've done what God's called us to do, and we know the blessing has already started to flow from that, and we don't know what the end of the story is yet. So, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. The point here is that Kate and Dave didn't go looking for something in return. It was done from a heart that wanted to give and bring light into a dark situation. And while I think there, like you said, there's more still to come on this story, just that act of showing grace, of giving that into this group of people has brought joy into yours and Dave's life. Am I right? Yeah. All right, verse 39. Jesus gave the following illustration. Can one blind man lead another? Won't they both fall into a ditch? Students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will become like the teacher. If the church wants to lead the world out of darkness, we have no hope of doing that until we deal with our own blind spots. We will never have any authority to lead in any area of society if we can't rise above a self-centered, judging, critical, condemning attitude. And sadly, sometimes those things, those attributes can be evident in the wider church. You know what I mean, right? You do see it at times. Fast to judge and condemn and slow to love and forgive, and it's supposed to be the opposite. That may not be you personally, but we're all part of God's church, and so we're responsible for how the whole church brings light into the world. Ultimately, it's Jesus who is the teacher that we learn from, though. I think that's my takeaway from these two verses here. He didn't condemn the prostitute who was about to be attacked by the religious leaders. He loved the Samaritan woman at the well that was despised by his friends, by the Jews. He went to the homes of the most corrupt people in their society. He had meals with them. He washed his disciples' feet, even though he was their Messiah. He washed their feet, his followers, like a servant king. He showed compassion to the poor and needy, and he had understanding for those who were struggling to understand. He told Peter to put away his sword when faced with injustice. He hung on the cross and he asked his persecutors from the cross to be forgiven. He gave his life so that we could have life. And so should we. This is a simple but important point. Follow the example of Jesus and let him be your teacher. And let's be humble at all times. Only then do we have a hope of shining the light into the dark world. Point 3. Hypocrisy, which to be honest is what most of this passage is about, is what turns people away from the church, and it turns people away from me and you. Verse 41, and why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you've got a log in your own? How can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? And then Jesus, with an exclamation mark, says, hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. So there are times when we have to help people. But that's not the main point, is it? It's linked to the previous verses. No one listens to a hypocrite. All right, let's be challenged, if you haven't been already. Have you ever used the phrase, when you've done something wrong, I'm just a sinner? Have you ever used that phrase? Maybe just me. In my opinion, that phrase should be gone from our vocabulary. And why do I say that? Because it's usually an excuse for our hypocrisy. Because we're judging others and holding them to a high standard. And when we do something, I'm just a sinner. Instead of saying I'm just a sinner like everyone else, when you know you've done the wrong thing, the correct thing to say is this. Here's what we say. I'm sorry. I've done the wrong thing. If you don't want to be a hypocrite, own up to what you did wrong and immediately apologize. You know, we talked about keeping it real. We had a great sermon from Pastor Steve last week on this. Well, let me relate that to this sermon or to this passage. If you want to keep it real, let's admit that what we say or do or what we said or did was wrong, and let's apologize for it. Let's not make excuses for ourselves. Let's go straight to the problem. It's us. And we need to apologize. Don't even think of looking at someone else's faults while you've got your own to deal with first. And there's nothing worse than a judgmental person who's an expert at pointing out other people's faults when everyone else can see their faults, you know, like a big flashing neon sign. But that's not really the point that Jesus is making, to be honest. As bad as that is when we come across people like that, the point is, what about us? It's for all of us. Stop worrying about everyone else's faults. What is Jesus saying to me? What is he saying to us today? What is that log? You think I don't have one? I can see everyone else's speck clear as a bell. That's your log. Right there. Okay. Yep. Some of you are with me, some of you aren't. That's all right. Let's look at the last few verses. Verse 43. A good tree can't produce bad fruit. A bad tree can't produce good fruit. A tree is identified by its fruit. Figs are never gathered from thorn bushes, and grapes are not picked from bramble bushes. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. An evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what's in here. What you say flows from what's in your heart. Point 4, you can tell the quality of a person's heart by the quality of their fruit. In fact, it's as easy as that last sentence in verse 45. The mere words we say reveal what's going on in here, and the way we say them, and the things we don't say. If good things flow from me, I have a good heart. If bad things flow from me, I have, the verse isn't there, but it uses the word that starts with E and ends in L. And it says, if that's what's flowing from you, then that's your heart. Does that seem harsh? That's what Jesus said. I have a problem, actually. A heart problem. And I can tell when things come out of my heart, out of my mouth, that reveal what's going on in here. I'm just reading the words in the Bible. The truth is, the fruit that comes from our lives should be delicious to those around us, even the ones we don't know personally. That's the title of today's sermon. It's called Delicious Fruit. What's your favourite piece of fruit, church? Mangoes. I'm with you. Have you ever had an apple that was mushy and didn't taste that good? Have you ever had an apple that was just so sweet? And doesn't it just put a smile on your face? Those two things represent the actions that we do, the words that we say. We produce fruit. It's usually in the stuff that's around us, the relationships we have, the conflict that seems to follow us around, the trail of people behind us that we may have damaged. It's the apple that doesn't taste very good. All around you is life. And people that you've loved and that you've supported and that you've pulled beside when they've gone through hard times, or that you've given generously to, over and over and over and over again, and all of a sudden the fruit around you is healthy and it's tasty and it's delicious. People like that fruit around you, church. And we can tell the state of our heart by the fruit around us. Now, two people that I admire in this church, and I admire many, is Sid and Dorothy Gibson, and they don't even know I'm mentioning their names today, and they won't want me to, which is why I didn't check. But you can tell their heart by their fruit, right? There are many more like that here, but I'm using these guys as an example because here's what I love about Sid and Dorothy. They go away for these big chunks of time, we miss them, and they come back, we missed you, Pastor, we've missed the church, and while we're gone, we led 500 people to Jesus, and the world is so exciting, and we sat next to this guy on the plane, and he needed us, and God put us there. It's divine appointments all around us. There's fruit everywhere. People keep telling me, I don't know how they put up with this, to be honest. I ring Sid and Dorothy for prayer because I know they'll pray for me. I've got these things going on in my life. They must get phone calls all day, every day. They are humble. And they won't like me saying these things. God has worked in their hearts. You know, they'd probably tell you that it wasn't always like this and they still go through lots of struggles and difficulties. But God has worked in their hearts. They are servants of Jesus. There's one thing that you also need to know about them, is that they are often on their knees, praying for you and me in this church. A good chunk of every day. They won't tell you that because they're humble. But surely the two things are linked. The way they're walking with the Lord and the fruit that's all around them. Walk closely with Jesus every day and let him change your heart and destroy the judgment that you might bring, or the condemnation, that lack of forgiveness that you sometimes have, the lack of generosity that may not flow from you. Walk closely with Jesus and let him work on those things. Even when you don't feel like it, pray. Not only will you suddenly see the return you receive from others as you start to transform your heart, but you'll have the wonderful pleasure of representing the gospel to all the people around you. And then the church can never be accused of hypocrisy. In fact, on the contrary, we'll be known as life-giving sanctuaries, places of hope, places where people can encounter Jesus. So what does your fruit look like in your life? Does it bring life and health to those around you? Does it bring it to your spouse? To your kids? To your co-workers or your friends? Does it bring it into your church? Or does your fruit bring something that's the opposite to that life? Does your fruit point to a problem? And if it does, what will you do about it? What will you do about it today? And if you're sitting there and you're feeling God maybe talking to you and saying, that might be you, then I want you to also rejoice today because there's always hope. One thing I urge you to do after you've got on your knees with Jesus is find yourself a mentor. You need to regularly meet with someone who will mentor you and who will lovingly hold you to account. You need to learn some skills and how to love others, perhaps. You know, discipleship happens best when we are with one other person, one-on-one, lovingly speaking into each other's life, encouraging each other, building each other up. And if you've got some weaknesses in life, if perhaps you're reading these scriptures and you say, I need to be more like this, but I find it too hard, get someone beside you that can help you with it. And if you want me to help you find that person, I'll do that. You can let me know. I'll be happy to help you. He wants to help you today if you'll come to him. Never forget this truth from Jesus. The amount you give, good or bad, will determine the amount you get back, good or bad. Jesus is a loving and forgiving God, and he came to give us life to the full. Let's stand together. In a moment, we're going to sing. It's a song called God, You're So Good. Here's the lyrics. Amazing love that welcomes me. The kindness of mercy that bought with blood wholeheartedly my soul undeserving. God, you're so good. God, you're so good. You're so good to me. It's the third song today that we sang with these words. God, you are so good. Because we didn't deserve it, but he gave it anyway. As we sing this morning, talking about giving and receiving, as we sing, let's give back to God in worship in the same measure he gave to us. Can we do that together, church? Let's worship together.